Scripture reading is taken from 2 Timothy 1, verse 7. 2 Timothy 1, 7. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. The Lord bless the words and bless our speaker and give him strength and give us receptive ears as we listen to his words today.
Good morning and happy Sabbath. Always before I speak, I like to try to get here and relax and collect my thoughts and get ready. But as you've heard, that wasn't my morning this morning. But I am thankful. I'm thankful that I serve an awesome God and a God that knows the beginning from the end and can solve any of our problems. I also found out that sometimes it seems I preach sermons and I end up living them somehow. And that sort of slipped my mind, but somebody reminded me of that this morning, that I had made that comment before, and that does seem to be the case, unfortunately. But this morning, I wanted to get into the subject of fear, and I wasn't quite sure where I wanted to go with it. And last week, when Joyce asked me if I had something, and she was looking at the children's story, I said, well, I wasn't quite sure, but I get back to her. When I did, she's like, oh my word, this is providential because this is just, it just fits. So this morning, I wanted to, I guess as I thought back, I spoke in July, and the time before that was in March, so 1 year ago. And 1 year ago, I think almost this weekend exactly, I didn't check it exactly, but plus or minus a week, was the first week of kind of when COVID started to shut down the church. And I had almost nobody here in church that week, and it was really weird preaching to an almost empty church, because that was something new. But as we went through this last year, a lot of things have changed. A lot of things have been new, have been different. And I guess as I looked at it from my perspective, and as a Christian looked at it, I had some things started rolling around in my head. And that's what I wanted to get into today and to talk with you about. Now, we all have fears to lesser or greater extent. I know snakes are on the top of up there, right at the top of the list, along with spiders, the dark, heights. Heights is a big one. Now, there are some things where fear, or at least a measure of fear, is important, and it's fun, right? Roller coasters would not be any fun if they weren't scary. If you weren't in fear, roller coaster wouldn't really hold that attraction. So as we think about that and fear, sometimes fear does play an important role. I was talking to someone and she said, well, her parents were worried about her growing up. They were not worried about the other siblings. She was the one that had no fear. They worried about her because she wasn't scared to do anything. Now, her brother was not that case. He was scared of everything, and they didn't need to worry. He would take care of himself and just stay out of trouble because of fear. But how does fear play out in your life and my life? And should it play out as Christians? And I want to try to get into that a little bit here this morning. The one slide that I wanted to start with here is we just talk about fear and that. Okay, this bridge, the Zhejiang glass bridge in China, when it was built, well, now let's see. Okay, well, somewhere here. Almost had it. There we go. All right. When it was built, it was the largest bridge. It was 980 feet high and 1,410 feet long. And as you look there, that is glass. You're actually looking right through the bridge. Okay. Anybody here say, yeah, height's my thing, would love to just walk straight down the middle of that bridge? There's always a few. I've done things. I stood on a glass floor up in Canada at the CN Tower there. But I walk up to the edge and I have to take a deep breath. And I have to think, okay, and my logical mind says that this works. I just saw somebody standing on it. I know that this works. I need to think about it and kind of calm myself down and take that step. And that process is kind of what I want to talk about today. What is that process when we face fear? And how does that work? Because sometimes we face something that looks just like that bridge. On my way here today, this was not in my plan. I do not have a vehicle to drive now. I need one tomorrow morning. I need one Monday morning. I don't have a vehicle, but what am I going to do? I'm standing at the end of this bridge, and I'm looking, and I don't understand. I don't see, and I don't really want to move forward into this because this is an unknown. It's scary to me. But God has a plan. And that's what I want to talk about today. So I want to get into some case studies here of Bible characters and what we can learn from them, what they went through, how they reacted, and what we can learn from them. So if you just bow your heads as we start here into the Word. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, just be with us today. Open our hearts and minds to your Word. Help me to be able to just relax, to share, Lord, what is on my mind. As I read through your words, I felt that I was led to this topic today, Lord. Just help me to communicate clearly the ideas, the principles, Lord, the way that you have worked with and taught people through and brought people through their fears, Lord. Guide each of us today, I pray. Amen. The interesting thing is, and the first character that I picked for my case study comes in the category of those not following God. Because it turns out it matters what category you're in, how fear affects you. And my first character was a classic. I think ever since childhood, some of the translations, they make the Bible more vivid. But this one, honestly, the King James, I looked at it last night, and the King James is still my favorite explanation. It's just so vivid. And it's describing King Belshazzar as the hand writes on the wall, and he realizes something is going on, and it's not good. In Daniel chapter 5, verse 6, it says, "Then the king's countenance changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that his joints of his hips were loosened, and his knees knocked against each other." That is fear. That is complete and utter fear right there. He just immediately realizes he's in trouble. There is no, he doesn't even understand the message yet, and he is already sure that he's in trouble, that there is a problem, and it's beyond his capability to handle. Daniel comes in, translates the message, and gives him the meaning. But I found it interesting that he points out to the king, you knew God, but you did not humble yourself. You had opportunity, but you chose not to. So tonight, the kingdom will be taken from you as well as your life. He would die that night and lose the kingdom and his life. The second one that I have that I wanted to share in this category was King Saul. King Saul had started out walking with God. He had been selected by God. Samuel had come and anointed him. He had been set up as the first king of Israel. He had many many advantages, many opportunities. But ultimately, he chose to walk his own way, not to follow God, but to walk in his own way. And in doing that, he found himself in a very tight situation. Samuel had died, and he had so long pushed God away that God was not there to talk to him, to lead him, to guide him anymore. And it was a very sad event in his life that he found himself going to the witch of Endor to find out what he should do. He's in fear. He's facing a battle the next day, and he goes for help. He goes for some advice. And yet, the advice he gets brings him no comfort. He's told that not only would he die, but that God had forsaken him. Devastating news, not only he, but his sons as well. So both of those characters knew God, chose not to follow God, found themselves at a crossroads facing the ultimate fear, and both lost their lives. Not just their lives, but their eternal lives as well. And I found that really sad. That group is a very sad group to be in. So I went further, because there are a lot of examples in the Bible. I found one place that claimed, I actually found a bunch of places that claimed that there is fear not. It happens 365 times in the Bible, once for every day of the year. Actually, it's not quite true. There might be verses that you could say, well, that means not to fear, or this means that. That could be. But if you just do the straight word search, it doesn't come up to that number. But there are a lot of them. I just did it in the app on my phone, and I immediately came up with like 70 or 80. And so it's a common phrase, fear not, do not be afraid. So what about Christians? We've seen examples when those who knew God rejected God and walked their own way, and they face fear, and they face the consequences of not walking, not having God in their lives. The first person that I picked is actually a Bible hero. So why would I pick him for fear? Because Elijah at Mount Carmel faces not only the king of Israel, 450 prophets of Baal, and the people of Israel, all doubting, all angry. There's been a drought. And the king has singled him out as the cause, as the problem. And yet, he stands firm all day on the mountain. And in the evening, he prepares a sacrifice, and God answers miraculously with fire, consumes the entire sacrifice. Then, to top that off, he prays, and rain comes. You would think at that point, walking from that mountaintop experience, that Elijah would be rock solid. But he fails the next morning. After running, and I can't remember now the distance, but it says the Spirit of God came on him, and he led the king's chariot all the way back to Jezreel. And even after that, even after witnessing, participating in, and being touched by the hand of God to do something that was physically impossible to do, the next morning he hears Jezebel wants to kill him, and he takes off running. And I thought that was a very interesting story, because it's what happens to him in his fear. Yes, he reacted to the fear, and we wonder, why did he react that way? Well, that was his human side coming out. He didn't trust that God had his back for this day as well, just like yesterday. He got afraid and he ran. But there's a difference in his story than the first two that we had. And that is that when he ran and he was near death, he was tired, he laid down to sleep, an angel wakes him up and gives him food and water and tells him to carry on. God comes on him, gives him strength, and he travels into the wilderness where he meets with God. And God isn't harsh with him. God doesn't reprimand him. God gives him some things to think about. He comes, there's a wind, there's fire, an earthquake, all of these tremendous events. And yet, none of them are God. Elijah is introduced to the still small voice that is God. The still small voice. And I thought that that was a beautiful, beautiful lesson. The next one in this category of those that are walking with Christ, those who believe in him but experience fear, is a group. And this group is the disciples. They are literally walking with Jesus every day. They have gotten to know him. They are with him. And just like Elijah, they have a mountaintop experience, albeit in the boat on a lake. But it didn't stick. Somehow it didn't stick. You remember, they are struggling. The storm comes up. They are frightened. They think they're going to die. And they awaken Jesus and ask him, "Don't you care that we perish?" And what's his first thing? He didn't stop the storm right away. He asked them a question. He said, "You have little faith. Why are you afraid?" And then he tells the storm, "Be still," and it stops. You would think at that point, you would go, you know what? If we are with him, we're okay. But that morning, after miraculously seeing a storm stopped, and it says that the boat immediately arrived on the other shore. That meant that there wasn't any more sailing or rowing to be done. This was unusual. This was incredible. And yet, they get onto the shore, they start up the shore on foot, and they're immediately met by two demon-possessed men. And the disciples, in their hurry to get back to the boat, didn't wait for Jesus. They didn't even look. It wasn't until they were out in the boat that they realized that Jesus is not with them. And I thought that's amazing, because it sounds a lot like Elijah. He had an experience. He should have been strong. He should have been ready for this, but he wasn't. And Jesus' reaction here is so much like the reaction with Elijah. And it's such a beautiful lesson, because the disciples go back, and they go back to find Jesus. And what do they find? They find Jesus on the shore with the two demon-possessed men, now in their right minds. What a testimony. What a witness to God's power and his love. Jesus doesn't scold them. He doesn't come down harshly on them. Again, the mood there is a still small voice. People have been saved for the kingdom. And the disciples learn a powerful, powerful lesson that day about fear, about God's love, and about his true power. Yes, he can answer with fire. Yes, he can answer with earthquakes, winds, whatever's needed. He can also still the winds with a word. But it's the still small voice that really puts out fear. The similarities in both the reaction of the individuals and of God are very, very interesting. And I feel that in these categories, this is probably where I'm at right now. I'm in this category where I'm walking with God. I want to follow him. But sometimes fear overtakes me. Sometimes it comes up, and I feel like I'm ready to run. I want to get back in the boat. I want to rewind this morning. I want to go back. I want to take a different way. I don't want to have to face what I have in front of me. If I could just only go back and get in the boat and redo, that would be good. But life doesn't give us that. Well, they say you have to face your fears. You can't run. There's so many examples of this in the Bible, so many different ones where Jesus is working with people, working them through their fears. And it just struck me. And those are just the two that I picked. But if you can think of others this afternoon, go and look at that. Look at how Jesus helps people through their fears. David, Jonah. Jonah had fears. He ran. He got on a boat and went the other direction. And God worked with him. The last group that I want to talk about here this morning is the group that is following God selflessly. And I put that in there. This is an important group. Because what I want to kind of show you here is that fear has kind of a progression in the Christian's life. We can know God, but not follow, and basically reject and walk away from him. And then when we face fear, we have absolutely nothing to hold on to. We can be following God, learning, growing in our walk with him. We can face fear and fail, and God brings us back, strengthens and encourages us, and shows us his will and his love and his ability to care for us. And then there's a group of people that are following God selflessly, and fear to them has become a whole new paradigm. They still face fear, but it's a different kind of fear. And the first one I want to talk about is Abraham. And in Genesis 18, Abraham is visited by three strangers. It's in the heat of the day, and he is sitting under a tree by his tent, and he sees three strangers in the distance, and they're coming. And he runs out to meet them. He bows down. He invites them in for water, for food. And as they sit there and talk, many things happen, one of which, this is when Sarah is laughing, when they say that by this time next year that they would have a son. So the conversation, I think Abraham's picking up on the fact that these are not just ordinary travelers that might happen by. And when they get ready to leave, he goes with them to see them on their way. And he, in the course of this time that he's with them, the Lord reveals to him the purpose for their trip and who he is. And Abraham is not shocked or in fear of the Lord. It said the Lord started talking with the group and said, should I share with Abraham what I am about to do? Should I tell him? And it's interesting because the Lord takes and he reaffirms Abraham's calling. He reaffirms Abraham's mission. Abraham was called. And when he was called, he was told not to fear. And we know that he failed on the way. We know that in his travels, in his time in Egypt, he was fearful. And it created a huge problem with Pharaoh and his wife and that whole thing. And he made a terrible mistake in not trusting God. But now Abraham is further down that road and that walk with Christ. And when he realizes that it's the Lord that he's talking to, and the Lord has a conversation and reaffirms his calling, that he was called to be the father of a great nation, that he was called to not only his own family, but to be a witness, to share the truth about God. Abraham knows about Sodom and Gomorrah. He knows that there's going to be an issue there. If God has come to judge, they stand in a very, very poor place. There is a lot of wickedness, a lot of sin there. And Abraham puts himself in front of the Lord, it says. He steps in front of him. The other two travelers go on towards Sodom. But Abraham places himself in front of the Lord, and he talks to him. He says, Lord, for 50 righteous will you spare the city? What drove Abraham to step in front of the Lord, to essentially block his path? Say, wait, I want to talk. It was fear. And why do we know it was fear? Because after the Lord said, for 50 I will spare the city, Abraham still felt a burning fear. He said, well, Lord, what about 45? The Lord said, for 45. Abraham is still feeling the fear. The fear is still with him that 45 is still too high. What if? What if we've missed it by 5 and I could have said something? So he goes, Lord, what about 40? And you know the story. He goes 30, 20. And finally he says, Lord, please don't be angry with me, but I need to ask you one more time for one more. For 10. For only 10 would you spare the cities. And again, with the Lord's style, I hear a still small voice. It's not boisterous. They're having a conversation. And he reassures Abraham that for 10, he will spare the city. Abraham's fears are addressed. He feels that he has done everything that he can do. And he returns to his tent, knowing that God will spare the city for the sake of 10. And I believe he's still hoping that 10 was enough. He's still hoping that he did all that he could do for the people of the city. The second one is Moses. And this is from Genesis 32. Moses is on the mountain with God. This is when he gets the 10 Commandments. And we know what the children of Israel were doing in the valley below. And it comes to God's attention that the children of Israel have apostatized. They have built a golden calf and they are worshiping it. And God is angry with the children of Israel. And he addresses Moses about it. They are in conversation. And in verse 7, he says, get down, for the people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made for themselves a molded calf and worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, this is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and indeed it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, and I will make you a great nation. Would God have broken his word if he consumed all of the Israelites at that point and made Moses the great nation? He wouldn't have, really, I guess. Moses was a direct descendant of Abraham. The promise to Abraham to be a great nation certainly would have been fulfilled. Moses could have said, okay, I understand, Lord. I'm willing to take on that role. The Lord spoke. But Moses is in a different place now. His fear is not for himself. His fear is not of God. His fear are for lost souls, the children of Israel. It says, then Moses pleaded with the Lord his God and said, Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? What would the Egyptians say? He brought them out to harm them, to kill them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth. Turn from your fierce wrath and relent from this harm to your people. Abraham puts himself in that position, Moses puts himself in the same position Abraham was. He's standing before God pleading for a people. And it's interesting to me that his fear is for others. His fear is for others' salvation. And ultimately, he goes down, he sees what's going on, he goes back up, and he continues to talk with God about it. He is willing to have his own name blotted out of the books for the sake of the people of Israel. If God will turn aside his wrath, give them a second chance, he is willing to give up his own salvation for theirs, for their opportunity. So the question is, where am I, where are you in your growth with fear? Because I'm convinced that fear doesn't go away no matter how much we read the Word, how much we pray, how much time we spend in church. Fear is something we are going to have on this earth. It is. But what's it going to motivate us to do? What's it going to say about where we are in our walk with God? Is this fear going to be something that just paralyzes me? Am I going to be the king looking at the handwriting on the wall with my knees knocking one against the other, knowing that tonight I'm going to die and my life is going to be over, worthless, and done? Or like Elijah, am I going to face a fear, overcome it? Am I going to face another fear and fail and run? And am I going to be listening for that still small voice that is God bringing me back, pointing me back to where I need to be? That is where I want to be, or where I want to be moving from towards the last one. And that is when fear to me is not for myself anymore. I fear nothing for myself. The Bible says, do not fear those that can kill the body, but can kill the body and the soul. In other words, my salvation. But even that, Moses was willing to set aside for others. That's where I would like to be moving. I want to care so much about other people that fear to me becomes a driving force for their salvation. The fear that I face in my life, because it's inevitable, fear will come, but it's going to be a motivation to reach others. There is a quote here from Adventist Home, page 186. And it says, Satan is marshaling his host. And are we individually prepared for the fearful conflict that is just before us? Are we preparing our children for the great crisis? Are we preparing ourselves and our households to stand the position of our or to understand the position of our adversary and their modes of warfare? Are our children forming habits of decision that they may be firm and unyielding in every manner of principle and duty? I pray that we all may understand the signs of the times, and that we may so prepare ourselves, our children, that in the time of conflict, God may be our refuge and defense. That's beautiful and sobering. I mean, think about what that's saying. As we look at these stories, are we preparing so that when crisis comes, when conflict arises, that God is our refuge? I said in the beginning, as COVID has unwound over this past year, as I've seen businesses closing and churches closing and people afraid of other people. The number one Googled fear or phobia for 2020 was the fear of other people. And I think about Psalm 91 in my mind. Now, Psalm 91 is not describing the COVID pandemic. However, it's describing Christians, it's describing followers of God that are so close to Him and walking with Him that they can go through anything without fear. 1,000, 10,000 falling at their left and right. Nothing can touch them. Where am I in that walk? Is that my preparation? Am I working on that as my goal? Was I there this year? I don't feel like it. I don't think society was. This has been crippling. It's been crippling to churches, to businesses. So where are we in our walk and in our growth with fear? We have an evangelistic series coming up. And as I thought about this, and this fear that Abraham held and Moses held in their hearts, that others would be lost, I thought about, where are we as a church? Are we ready? Are we motivated by fear to come here? Or are we motivated by fear to go and reach out to others with the good news of God, His love, salvation, and soon coming? What motivates us? What fear is it? It says time is short, and do we know the signs? Do we see what's going on around us? Well, now if we're to that slide already, then I didn't have the right one on the screen. From Acts of the Apostles, page 357. There are times when it seems to the servant of God impossible to do the work necessary to be done because of the lack of means to carry on a strong, solid work. Some are fearful that with the facilities at their command, they cannot do all that they feel it is their duty to do. But if they advance in faith, and the salvation of God will be revealed, and prosperity will attend their efforts. He who has bidden his followers go into all parts of the world will sustain every laborer who in obedience to his command seeks to proclaim his message. When I thought about it, the fear for others, that push, that desire to tell others, it's 100% backed up by God. If you're feeling like you need to talk to somebody, if you're feeling like there are people that need to know, then that's a good fear to have. That's a good fear to be motivated by. Because God is 100% behind your efforts to go out and reach to your neighbors, your friends, your family. And it doesn't matter if you don't have the talent. It doesn't matter if you don't think that we have the resources. God will bless and take whatever it is, multiply it, and it will be successful because He has promised. In 2 Chronicles 20, verse 17, it says, "You will not need to fight this battle." And this is God speaking to the children of Israel. But I believe it applies to us today. It says, "Position yourselves, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord, who is with you, O Judah and Jerusalem. Do not fear or be dismayed. Tomorrow, go out against them, for the Lord is with you." Again, we don't just sit back because God is with us, because it's scary. No, God said go out. But you're not going to have to fight. In other words, you don't have to do the part you can't do. But you have to stand up and you have to go out. And I will be with you. You will see the Lord with you. I just want to encourage you, as you face fear, go to the Bible. There are so many verses. When I first started looking at this topic, I had a whole list of verses and encouraging about God being with us, not having to fear, all of those promises that we can hold on to. But as I worked on the sermon, it became more about this step, this this progression we have as Christians with fear and what it's motivating us to do in our lives. So look at yourself. Find cases where you can fit into some of these different scenarios. Were you like Elijah? Did you take and just pick up and run for the wilderness? Did you not want to be there in that fight anymore? Or like Moses and Abraham, did you feel a fear for somebody else's salvation? Did you sense their need? And did it feel in your heart like a fear? If it did, that's okay, because that is good. God can answer those fears as well. He's promised. The one text I'd like to just leave with today here as we close is from Luke chapter 12, verse 32. It says, "Do not fear, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." I just think that that's beautiful. Wherever you're at with fear, whatever it is that's in front of you today, this coming week, as we face unknowns, remember, it is His good pleasure to give us the kingdom. Sit down. That hurts.
Yikes. Hymn 469, Leaning on the Everlasting Arms. Please stand.
Leaning on the everlasting
this life, may we lean on your arms. May we first run to you. May we give everything that we have, Lord, into your care. May we die to self each day, Lord, and start to live more selflessly and feel those pangs of fear, Lord, for others, for their salvation, for their well-being. Lord, may we work in our own lives, in our own homes, to prepare for what's coming, knowing that we do not have to fear if we stand with you. Lord, if we dwell in the secret place of the Most High, in your shadow, Lord, nothing can touch us, nothing can harm us. But we may still feel fear. Let that fear be for others. Let that fear motivate us to reach out with the good news of your soon return. Keep each of us, Lord, we pray. Amen.